We're going to talk a little bit about due diligence. People often hear this term and they wonder, okay, what exactly is due diligence? Whether it's in an M&A, like buying and selling a business, or it's a real estate transaction, or just about anything, even potentially investing yourself, you want to do due diligence on what it is, the transaction that you're doing. So I'm going to cover a little bit about what exactly goes into due diligence. It's basically an investigation process. So think about when you go to buy a home, you go to do an open house. You go to an open house, you look at the house, you take a look at the inside, you inspect it, you get a general idea about it, you find out how much they're asking. That's all due diligence. That's the starting process of due diligence. Then if you put an offer in, then that starts kind of a due diligence period under a contract where you can have certain contingencies like, okay, well, if it turns out that the home has termites, then I can back out of the contract. So you go out and you get a termite report, or you get a home inspection done. You do a lot of different things. You have a title company that does a title search. These are all due diligence that you're doing on the house that you're buying. So same thing when it comes to buying a business, large real estate transactions. If you're investing your own money, basically you want to do some due diligence and investigate, find out what it is that you're buying, and if there's any problems with it, any risks associated with it. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to go over a little bit about some of the things that might go into due diligence. So what exactly is due diligence? So in acquisitions, an acquisition is a merger and acquisition. It's when you buy a business, typically. So this is a business acquisition, M&A, real property acquisitions, or investing into a specific deal. Now, what happens during due diligence? Usually what you're doing is you're investigating the asset or the investment that you're going to make. Okay, what am I putting my money into? What am I getting for my money? You want to learn about all of the risks. One of the biggest things is full and fair disclosure, because this is an area where litigation happens down the road. If there's not full and fair disclosure by the person selling, then a lot of times there's potential for lawsuits because somebody says, hey, you didn't tell me about all these problems and you should have disclosed that stuff to me. In a home purchase, a lot of times there's standardized forms for certain disclosures. Even in home inspections, a lot of times the report will have disclosures about things that the home inspector found. So you want to make sure that you've gotten full disclosure about what it is you're about to enter into and learn about potential risks, whether they're actual risks or maybe some potential risk that could happen in the future. You want to ask about the terms of the deal. What is the deal structure? How's it set up? What are the terms? What is the purchase price? How can I pay it? How long until closing? You also start negotiating the terms for the deal, whether you do a term sheet, an LOI, which is a letter of intent. That's sort of the starting point of giving an offer on whatever transaction you're getting into before you put together basically you hire attorneys and they put together all the full legal paperwork for the contracts that you're going to sign to make the deal close. The LOI or term sheet is the early phase when you're doing your due diligence, and there might be a time period for you to do so. A lot of times, especially in an M&A transaction, something called a data room is set up. This is just like Dropbox, basically, or Google Drive. Usually there's specialized services that have more confidential, private, password-protected data rooms. And this is where each side uploads documents. You might have a folder for certain legal things or contracts that you have. They're all in different folders, so everyone can review them and take a look at them. Each side is usually going to prepare a due diligence checklist. And if you want to shoot me an email, I'll send you a sample of my due diligence checklist. It is pretty extensive for a business acquisition. Basically all the areas of things that you want to look at and cover. I think it's about 8 pages long, but it's quite a few items on there just for you to look at to see if there's any potential risks there. So what are some of the areas that you might look at in that due diligence checklist? It'll have areas for things like, okay, what are the assets? What are the liabilities? What are the contracts entered into? If you're buying a business, what are the contracts that business has with customers, vendors, suppliers, uh, any type of contract that they might have. You want to see what the terms are. What is the condition of the assets? How many assets are included versus not included? What are the liabilities of that business? Is there a potential lawsuit? Is there a large loan outstanding? Is there an SBA loan? You want to find all this stuff out. You ask for company records. So how long has this company been around? How was it formed? Who are the owners? Give me the records that show what this company's been doing since it was started. That also includes ownership records, the history of the business, transfers of ownership, transactions that might have been involved in, the capital structure, which means the ownership structure. So you might have the founder might have just common shares in a corporation, and maybe they got an investor who got some preferred shares. So you want to make sure you understand that capital structure when you go into the transaction, because that can have an impact on how you structure the deal, what your rights might be, any unknown people out there that could have, maybe there's warrants or options to buy equity, and you want to make sure those are covered, so you don't buy a corporation and find out, oh, you're obligated to give this person some shares down the road. What are the finance and financial information, accounting records, financial statements? This is pretty common in M&A. You'll ask for recent financial statements over the last maybe 2 or 3 years. And then up until the date of the transaction, you usually get updated financials, because you usually base a valuation a lot of times on financial information. You also want to see how the company is doing. And if there's trends in things like the revenue suddenly starts going down right before closing and they didn't tell you about that, you need to find out why that happened. Taxes, you want to make sure, if there's any outstanding tax due, what is the tax structure of the deal that you're putting together, because that can have a huge impact on whether you do an asset purchase or a stock purchase of a company. Employees, management, personnel, vendors, anyone who's involved in the operation of the business, you want to find out about who they have as employees, who's in management, who the different personnel are that they work with, who are their vendors, because this can have an impact on taking over a business. And let's say the vendors don't want to stick with you with new management or new ownership. Operations and locations. Is there a lease on the current facility? How long is the lease? Can you extend it? Or do they own the property, and are they going to sell it to you or lease it back to you? These are all things that you have to look at. Where are the different operations of this business? Insurance, that can be a key thing. What insurance do they currently have, and what are you going to need to put in place to properly protect this business? And are there any pending claims against that insurance? And these are some other issues, environmental issues, intellectual property. Do they have the rights to their domain name? Do they have the rights to certain trademarks? Have they filed for a patent? You want to find these things out. Also, do they have the right permits or licenses to be doing business legally where they're at, where they're located? There could be a city business license they need that they don't have, or a police permit. Environmental can have a huge impact on future liabilities, whether you're buying the real estate underneath a business, and sometimes even if you're just leasing it, the business could have liabilities. You didn't know that there was something that could have been hazardous in an office supply store that was dumped out back, and suddenly you're responsible. So, and when you're looking at a business acquisition, usually some of the things we look at is this going to be an asset or a stock deal? What are the tax issues associated with it? Are you assuming liabilities? Are you, if it's an asset purchase, what assets are you getting? What assets are you not getting? Have you had an appraisal done to see the value of the business or the assets? What are the main risks involved in this acquisition? What's the price? What does it include? Do you get 100% ownership? Or are you just buying all the assets, some of the assets? How is the purchase price going to be paid? So that's usually goes into the contract. Okay, we're paying a certain amount of a deposit, maybe an earnest money deposit. That goes towards the purchase price. The rest is maybe 70% cash, we're getting an SBA loan or some other loan, or maybe the seller themselves are financing the deal. There can also be potentially an earnout. There's a lot of different terms that you have to figure out on how the purchase price is going to be paid over what period of time. What about timing? So due diligence can take 14 days. It can take a year. It just depends on the type of business, what type of reports, inspections, appraisals, anything that you need to have done. You need to basically calculate that in. How long is the due diligence period? That is their exclusivity, meaning the seller cannot try to sell this to somebody else during that exclusivity period. Have you negotiated that? What about the due diligence period? Once it expires, are you locked in or can you get out of the deal somehow? What's the transition plan? Basically, when you take over as the business, are the current managers and employees going to stay? Will all the contracts transfer over? Are there any licensing or regulatory issues? Because a change in control can trigger maybe a certain license to no longer be valid. So you have to figure all this stuff out ahead of time. You need consent to transfer these licenses or contracts. As I mentioned, employees, who's going to stay? Is the owner going to help in a transition period? It's pretty common where a smaller, business, the current owner who's selling has agreed to stay on for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, a year to help transition and to transfer that knowledge that they have of the business over to the new owners and basically make for a smooth transition. What's your operational plan and your exit plan for this business? Are you going to eventually sell it off? Like, what's the eventual end plan for this business? Real estate acquisitions, some similar type of terms: purchase price, how it's paid. Is there a deposit put into escrow? Who's the escrow agent? How long is it going to take to close, which is usually based on the lender giving approval for any kind of loan? Does it include other assets? So if you're buying a piece of property, let's say, whether it's land, there's some kind of building on the land, what's inside that building? Or if you're buying an apartment complex, is there certain assets that they use in managing the property that are going to be included in the purchase? You want to make sure that stuff is covered. Are there any liens on the property? Is there any issues with existing tenants, pending improvements, potential mechanics liens that might be filed from pending improvements? What does the title report show? So you have to go through all these things in a real estate acquisition. Is there any pending litigation or threatened litigation against the property? Any other legal issues going on? Do they have all the right permits and licenses? Then also looking at the risks. Are there risks in the title? You'll probably get a title insurance policy. Will that cover everything? Are there exceptions? There are environmental issues. Do you have a survey? Inspection reports you need? Are there leases that either need to transfer, or what's going on with the leases and the existing tenants, if any? Who's the property manager? And are you going to make changes to the property manager after you take over? And again, what's your operational or exit plan? When it comes to investing, let's say you've got some cash and you want to invest in, whether it's a real estate deal or you're not the one actually doing the business acquisition, you're just putting money into a fund that's going to do it. What do you want to look for? You're probably going to look at a pitch deck, a PPM, a private placement memorandum or offering memorandum. And that's going to disclose basically everything about the deal and the risks involved. An LOI or a term sheet could be the early stages to say, here's what you're offering or what you're getting in exchange for your investment. What are the main terms? Okay, I'm getting, for $1 million, I'm getting 20% of this business in common stock, or, whatever the terms are. And any investors' rights that you might be getting along with that. Some of the stuff that might be disclosed in a PPM is, okay, what is the deal? What's the asset? Who's managing it, the asset and the deal? What's their background? Do they have any prior experience? What's their track record in this type of a deal? What's their operational plan? What's the plan for the asset? For example, if you're investing in a real estate deal, are they going to, do some improvements on the property and then, basically lease it up to 97% occupancy, hopefully, and then sell it in 3 years? Or what is their plan? The exit plan, and what's the timing of that? So you have an idea, because a lot of times your money is locked up. There's usually a hold period where your money is locked up, and until they make that eventual sale, you don't have liquidity. What am I getting for my investment? Am I getting a preferred return? Am I getting common stock with dividends? Or am I not going to get anything if it's a business, until the business is sold eventually? And what are the risk factors? This should be covered well in the private placement memorandum. Think of as an investor, like, what could potentially go wrong? And I tell this to clients: make sure you disclose not just all the positives and how great of a deal it is, but what potentially could go wrong. Okay, well, here's our projections, best case. What about worst case scenario? Is there something that we should tell you as an investor about? Let's say there's a property and suddenly the area near it is turned into a high crime area, and it may affect property values. Have we disclosed that? So these are some of the things, that risk factors that you need to think about. Even COVID was a risk factor that no one knew about, so no one could disclose it. Now people disclose things like pandemics and risk factors. So it's really, when it comes to any kind of acquisition or investment, it's all about risk versus reward. So you should never go into an investment, any kind, even an acquisition, thinking I'm going to get all my money back plus a certain profit. You should never, because it's never guaranteed. You have to understand all the potential risks versus what is the potential reward. And, usually the higher the risk, the higher the reward, hopefully. If it's low risk, you may have a low reward. And as I tell everyone, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, and you should run away from that. I don't care how good of a pitch they have. I see so many things happen over the last 20-something years where I look back at it and I say, how did you believe that any of this could actually happen? And people will, sophisticated people put their money into deals that sound too good to be true all the time. Look at FTX. All right, that's it for today on due diligence. Make sure to subscribe, and thank you for watching.